Montana Territory, August 1883, the sky cracked open with thunder the moment her wagon wheels snapped in two. Brielle Whitlow jumped, gripping the reins tighter as her horses reared. Rain pounded the canvas overhead, and the wheel, already shrieking under the weight of the wagon, buckled completely, tipping the whole thing sideways. Her daughter Bethany let out a frightened cry from inside. "Brielle," her son Bennett called out from the back, his small hands clutching the wooden side rail. "I'm right here," she shouted, leaping off the bench seat and running to them. The wind whipped her skirts around her legs as she hauled open the back flap. "Come on, both of you. We need to get out before it slides." "Where?" Bethany's voice trembled. "There's nothing out here," she was right. The plains stretched empty in all directions, golden grass bowing under the storm, no buildings, no trees, no people. Just a broken wagon, 2 children, and one mother who had run out of luck. "Bennett, take your sister's hand," Brielle said, her voice calm despite the panic clawing at her chest. "We're going to find cover." They never should have left Helena alone. But the family who promised to travel with them backed out at the last minute, and Brielle had no choice. Her husband had died the winter before fever took him fast, and there was nothing left for them in Helena but debts and judgment. She had bought the wagon with what little money they had, packed up the children, and headed east, hoping to reach Miles City before the snow. They had not even made it 100 miles. Bennett tugged on her skirt. "There's someone coming." She followed his gaze. A rider, dark against the storm, was galloping toward them from the north. Her heart pounded. Stranger or not, they needed help. The man pulled up just feet away, his horse skidding through the wet grass. He wore a long, oilskin duster, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and a rifle strapped to his saddle. He looked down at the wagon, then at her. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough with concern. Brielle didn't answer right away. She was trying to take him in his weathered face, the way he scanned the wagon first, then her children, then her, like he was checking for danger, not just damage. "Our wagon's broken," she said finally. "I have 2 children. We can't stay out in this storm." "You're not far from my place," he said, swinging down. "About a mile west. Can you walk?" She looked at her kids. Bethany nodded, clinging to her brother. Bennett looked up at the man warily. "What's your name?" Brielle asked. "Harlan Crowder." She hesitated. "I'm Brielle Whitlow. This is Bethany and Bennett." Harlan crouched beside the children, lowering his voice. "I've got a warm fireplace and dry blankets. You come with me, I'll get you safe." Bennett nodded. Bethany's lip trembled, but she took Harlan's hand anyway. He led them to his horse, helped the children into the saddle, then took the reins and started walking. Brielle followed, soaked and shaking but grateful. They reached a small ranch house tucked into a low rise. It was plain but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney and a modest barn out back. Harlan opened the door and ushered them inside. "Settle near the fire," he said, taking their coats. "I'll get dry clothes." The warmth hit her like a wave. Brielle knelt in front of her children, brushing wet hair from their faces. Bethany leaned into her shoulder. Bennett leaned into her other side. Harlan returned with shirts and trousers for the children, a heavy wool dress for Brielle. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "You did not have to stop." "I did," he said simply. "You were in trouble." He turned before she could say more, busying himself with the kettle. Brielle changed quickly and helped the kids into their dry clothes. When they were warm and fed, both children fell asleep near the fire. She stayed seated, watching Harlan pour coffee into 2 tin mugs. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "For now," he said. "Bought the land 4 years ago, built the house myself, planned to settle it with someone, but plans change." She understood that well. "I should go back for my wagon," she said. "There's supplies and you will not get far in this rain," he said. "I'll go tomorrow." She looked at him, really looked. He was broad-shouldered, quiet, the kind of man who said little but meant every word. There was something steady about him. No pity in his voice, just calm. The fire flickered between them. "You are kind," she said. He shrugged. "You needed help." It was simple, but it struck something deep in her. She had not been helped in a long time. "I'll only stay until the storm passes," she said. Then we'll find a way to keep going. You can stay as long as you need." She nodded once, but something about the way he said it quiet and sure made her chest warm. By morning, the storm had passed. The plains were soaked but clear. Harlan left early to salvage what he could from the wagon. He returned with the horses, a few sacks of flour and rice, and the children's books. "Wheels done for," he said, "but the frame's mostly intact. I can fix it." "You already did enough," she said, watching as Bethany ran barefoot through the kitchen, giggling. "It is no trouble." That night she cooked a stew from their salvaged food. Harlan taught Bennett how to split kindling. Bethany braided flowers into her hair. The next few days passed with quiet ease. The children slept sounder. Brielle found herself smiling more. She caught Harlan watching her, sometimes never too long, never too bold, but his gaze lingered just enough to make her heart skip. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she found him out by the barn hammering wood. "Is that part of the wagon?" she asked. "Making it stronger," he said, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "You will need it if you plan to keep going." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I do not know where we are going anymore," she said. He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were a deep brown, steady. "You do not have to go." Her throat tightened. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You are strong, you care about your kids, you keep going even when the road breaks under you." Silence stretched between them. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said. "Fever took her too." Brielle nodded, heart aching. "I never thought I would want this again," he added, voice quiet. "Until now." She stepped closer. He did not move, did not rush. "I don't know what comes next," she whispered. "I do," he said. "You and the kids, here." "With me?" She looked down, then up again. He was not offering her rescue, he was offering a home. Bethany's laugh echoed from inside the house. Bennett called out for her. Brielle reached out, her fingers brushing over Harlan's hand. "Then I think we should stay." The first frost came early. It curled along the edges of the pasture before sunup, silvering the grass like lace. Brielle stepped out onto the porch with a shawl drawn snug around her shoulders. Her breath fogged in the still air as she glanced toward the barn, where the low murmur of Harlan's voice mingled with the thud of hooves. He was talking to the mare again, same as he did each morning. Inside, Bethany stirred beneath the quilt, her hair spread across the pillow in a tangle of copper curls. Bennett had already risen, his small boots missing from beside the stove. He liked to follow Harlan out early, though he never said much when he did. He just watched, quiet and observant, holding tools out when asked. It surprised her, the way Bennett had taken to him. Her son had kept himself closed off for months after they left Helena, even before her letter to the man in Missouri went unanswered. She never told the children about that, how she'd sent her photograph and a carefully penned letter, only to receive a curt reply weeks later. "No interest in widows with children," it had said, nothing more. Brielle hadn't cried over it. She'd folded the letter once, then again, and burned it in the stove, letting the embers eat away at her shame. That was the same week she sold her sewing machine to buy more feed for the horses. She stepped down into the yard now, boots crunching over frozen earth. A red hen darted past her skirts, clucking sharply, and she reached the barn just as Harlan swung the gate shut behind the gelding. He looked up, a strip of sunlight catching the edge of his jaw. "You're up early," he said. "It's cold in the house," she answered, rubbing her arms. "Fire died down overnight. I'll haul in more wood." She nodded, then hesitated. "You want coffee?" He looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing the question for more than what it was. "I'd like that." They walked back to the house together, silent but easy in it. Brielle moved to stoke the fire while Harlan crouched beside Bennett, who was digging through a box of bent nails and stray hinges. "You find what you need?" Harlan asked. Bennett nodded once. "I need one more with a flat head. They're at the bottom left corner." "I keep them separate." Bennett dug deeper, his brow furrowed. "You organizing his tools now?" Brielle asked, setting the kettle on. "He lets me," Bennett said, not looking up. Harlan stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I figured he might want his own box soon." Something he can carry around. Brielle tilted her head. He'd like that. They didn't say more, but the warmth from the stove wasn't the only thing settling in her chest. Later that morning, while Bethany traced letters into the frost on the windowpane, Brielle stepped outside to hang the laundry. The wind had teeth in it, but the sun was strong enough to promise melt by noon. She pinned a shirt to the line just as a wagon creaked up the path from the north. It was a small rig drawn by a sway-backed mule, and the man driving it wore a battered felt hat pulled low. He raised a gloved hand in greeting. "Harlan around," he called as he drew nearer. Brielle stepped off the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's in the barn." The man nodded and climbed down stiffly. He moved like someone who'd spent too many years in the saddle and not enough on solid ground. He was back out within minutes, Harlan behind him carrying a wrapped parcel. "Thanks for the hinges," the man said. "That gate's been swinging wide near every night. You'll need to reset the post, not just the latch," Harlan replied. "I ain't got the tools for that. You can borrow mine." The man looked over at Brielle then, his gaze curious but not unkind. "You're the woman come from the west," he said. She straightened. "I am. Harlan told me your wagon gave out." "It did." He nodded, then glanced toward the house. "You fixing to stay?" "I believe I am." He studied her a moment longer, then tipped his hat. "Good." He needed someone to keep him from drying out into dust. Harlan gave him a flat look, and the man chuckled. "Name's Silas," he said to Brielle. "I live just past the creek cut near the cottonwoods. Nice to meet you." He tipped his hat again, climbed into the wagon, and clucked the mule forward. After he was gone, Brielle turned to Harlan. "Was he fishing for gossip?" "He was fishing for your name." She raised an eyebrow. "He just lost his wife last year," Harlan added. "He's not looking for anything, just misses a warm voice in the house." She looked toward the trail Silas had taken. "Seems decent enough." "He is." She turned back, folding her arms loosely across her chest. "How long have you known him?" "Since before I bought this land. We built the fence line together back when he was still renting pasture north of the ridge." She let that settle, then said, "He said you needed someone." Harlan stepped closer. "He says a lot of things. But is he right?" He didn't answer, but something in the way he looked at her made her heart beat harder. That evening, after the sun dropped low and painted the fields in amber, Brielle stood at the kitchen table shaping dough into biscuits. Bethany hummed softly to herself as she arranged dried flowers between pages of a book. Bennett was outside with Harlan, their voices muffled through the walls. When they came in, Harlan carried a small wooden box with a leather strap nailed to one side. He handed it to Bennett. "For your nails," he said, "and anything else you want to keep together." Bennett's eyes widened. "You built this," had extra pine, figured it might be useful. Bennett's hands ran along the edges like he was holding something precious. "Thank you." Harlan nodded once, then stepped back. Brielle watched him, a quiet ache blooming in her chest. Not the sharp kind she'd grown used to, but something steadier. A longing that felt like a promise not yet spoken. After supper, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low again, she found him on the porch, sharpening a blade by lantern light. She stood beside him, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "You ever think about that Missouri letter?" she asked, her voice soft. He didn't look up. "Can't say I do. I do. Not because he turned me down, but because I let it make me feel smaller than I am." He drew the whetstone carefully along the blade. "You're not small, Brielle." She looked out into the dark. "He said no without even meeting me." "Then he's a fool." She turned toward him. "You never asked what I was planning to do if I couldn't find a place." "I figured you'd figure it out." "I would have," she said. "But I'm tired of figuring things out alone." He set the knife down slowly, then looked up at her. "I don't want you to." She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then don't let me." They stood like that for a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Her breath caught as he opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, gold, the band unetched. "I sent for it last week," he said. "Waited until I was sure." She looked at him, heart thudding. "Sure of what?" "That you'd let me ask." She swallowed hard, a tear slipping down her cheek. He took her hand, not rushing. I know what it means. It's not just you, it's them, and I want all of it. She nodded, voice caught in her throat. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit like it had been waiting for her. Behind them, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and pine. The porch creaked as they stood together, not speaking, not needing to. The night was cold. But her hand was warm in his, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was bracing for what might go wrong. She felt like she'd come home. The first Sunday after the frost settled, the children stood at the edge of the pasture, watching a pair of white-tailed deer pick their way through the tall grass beyond the fence. Brielle called them back gently, her hands dusted with flour from the bread rising in the kitchen. They came running, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide with the kind of wonder they'd started to show more often. She'd begun to notice the change in them the way Bennett asked questions now. Not just about tools and animals, but about how things worked, why the moon changed shape, what snow felt like on a roof. Bethany sang to herself when she was alone, little tunes she made up, half-remembered from earlier years. The children had begun to belong here, as naturally as the fire belonged to the hearth. Inside, Harlan was fitting a new hinge to the cellar door, kneeling with one boot braced against the frame. The cellar had warped in the summer heat and now stuck when the cold settled in. Brielle leaned against the doorframe, watching his hands. "You want me to help with the handle?" she asked. He looked up, brow creased in thought. "Only if you can hold it steady while I drill." She stepped in without another word, crouching beside him. The iron handle was worn smooth from years of use. Her fingers curled around it, anchoring it still as he worked the brace and bit. The sound of the turning wood filled the quiet between them. Then he paused. "Sela's offered to ride into town with me next week," he said. "I need to pick up lumber and seed," she nodded. "You'll be gone the whole day, likely, I was thinking." "About asking you to come." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened on the handle. "I could leave the children with Sela's sister. She's kind and they'd be safe." "Why me?" she asked, not unkindly. He sat back on his heels, dusting wood shavings from his trousers. "Because I want to show you the town, not as a stranger passing through, as the woman I'm planning to marry." It was the first time he'd said the word aloud since slipping the ring on her finger. She felt it press against her skin now, a quiet weight, familiar already. "All right," she said. "We'll go." They didn't speak more of it that day, but the next morning, she found a pair of soft leather gloves left on her side of the table stitched by hand, lined with wool. They fit perfectly. The trip to Fort Keogh began before the sun was up. Bethany clung to her shawl, sleep still heavy in her eyes, while Bennett carried his satchel with a quiet seriousness that hadn't left him since Harlan gave him the wooden box. Sela's met them by the grove, his mule cart already loaded with apples and a barrel of nails. "Kate's waiting for the young uns," he said, helping Bethany down. "She's got a kitten they can chase around if they get bored." Bennett didn't say much, but when Kate appeared at the fence, he went to her without hesitation. Bethany followed, glancing back once. Brielle lifted a hand. Harlan placed hers on his arm. The ride into town was long but not uncomfortable. The road was rutted from wagon wheels, the earth frozen in places, muddy in others. Harlan drove with a steady hand, his coat buttoned to the throat, his hat pulled low. Brielle watched the land roll out before them, bare cottonwoods, the river half frozen, distant farmsteads with smoke curling softly toward the clouds. When they reached Fort Keogh, the town was busy with traders and winter travelers. Horses shifted in front of the mercantile, and the blacksmith's forge spat sparks into the morning air. Children ran past with mittens flapping from their wrists. It smelled of wood smoke, pine, and warm bread. They dismounted near the feed store. Harlan tied the horses, then turned to her. "First the lumber," he said. "Then we'll see the dressmaker." She blinked. "Dressmaker? I thought you might want something warmer, for winter church or Sunday visits." She followed him with a quiet smile, her boots crunching across the frozen walk. Inside the mercantile, the air was thick with sawdust and new hemp rope. Harlan conferred with the clerk about planks, while Brielle walked the narrow aisles, fingers trailing over jars of preserves and bolts of calico. She paused before a shelf of books worn titles in cracked leather bindings. She picked up one and opened it, the pages soft with age. "You read?" the storekeeper asked, coming around the corner. "I used to," she said. "Not much time for it now. Got a few new ones in last week." "I keep them in back." She followed him, and a moment later Harlan found her holding a slim volume of poetry, her thumb smoothing the edge of the cover. "Find something," she nodded. "For bedtime." "Bethany likes when I read aloud." He took it from her and added it to his growing stack without comment. The dressmaker's shop sat at the far end of the main street, behind a whitewashed porch lined with faded marigolds. Harlan held the door for her, and a bell chimed softly above. A woman in her early 40s looked up from a table strewn with thread and pins. "Afternoon," she said. "Need a fitting?" "Only if you've got time," Harlan said. "We won't trouble you long." The woman looked from him to Brielle, then motioned her forward. "I've got a wool blend that came from back east," she said, pulling a bolt from the shelf. "Deep red would suit your coloring." Brielle hesitated, then stepped forward. Harlan waited outside, arms folded, watching the street traffic as she stood behind the privacy curtain and let the woman measure her shoulders and waist. "Is it your wedding dress?" the woman asked, voice low. "No. Then what's the occasion?" Brielle met her eyes. "A new beginning." The woman didn't press further. She folded the cloth carefully, marked it, and promised to have it ready within 2 weeks. They spent the rest of the afternoon gathering seed, a steel bucket to replace the cracked one at the well, and a small vial of pine salve for Bethany's dry hands. By the time they returned to the cart, the sky had begun to darken, and the cold had deepened. On the ride home, Brielle leaned into Harlan's shoulder beneath the heavy quilt he'd brought. He didn't speak, but when she reached for his hand, he laced their fingers together without hesitation. They found the children asleep by Kate's hearth, limbs tangled, cheeks pink with leftover laughter. Brielle gathered Bethany into her arms, and Harlan carried Bennett with a tenderness that made Kate tilt her head slightly. Though she said nothing, back at the house, Harlan stoked the fire while Brielle laid the children down. The house smelled faintly of pine and beeswax. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, quiet flakes that settled without hurry. She stood at the window, watching it gather on the porch rail. "You think they'll be happy here?" she asked. Harlan joined her, his hand resting lightly on her back. "They already are." She looked over at him. "And you?" he nodded once. "I stopped waiting the day you said yes." She turned toward him slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just the letter that hurt. It was what it said about who I was, what I had to offer." His eyes didn't waver. "You offered your whole self." He didn't have the courage to take it. She touched the side of his face, her hand roughened from years of work. "I never thought I'd be wanted for all I am." "You were never too much," he said, "only meant for someone strong enough to carry it with you." The snow thickened as night settled in. The fire hissed softly behind them. And for the first time in her life, Brielle didn't feel like she had to earn her place. She had already arrived. The snow deepened in December. It came slow, layering the hills in soft silence, each flake a quiet echo of the one before. The land, so wide and dry through summer, now pressed close under the hush of winter. The fence lines blurred. The road into town disappeared in drifts. Life narrowed to the barn, the pasture, the house, and the people within it. Brielle kept her hands busy. She mended the children's wool socks, carded fleece from the sheep Harlan had bartered for the previous spring, and boiled soap in the iron kettle out back when the wind allowed. Her body moved through the work with purpose, but her mind wandered often toward the future, toward the shape of it, and how different it looked now with Harlan in it. She had been in his home more than a month. The days had softened around them like the snow outside, not quick, not sudden, but sure. Each morning, the rhythm of their shared lives unfolded without needing discussion. He would rise first to tend the animals. She would rise next, gathering the children and warming the hearth. They did not speak of these things anymore. They simply were. One late morning, while the children played with rags stuffed into a stitched ball near the fire, Harlan returned from the barn with a long bundle wrapped in cloth. Brielle met him at the door, brushing flour from her apron. "You've been out there nearly an hour," she said. "What is that?" He set the bundle on the table and unwound the cloth. Inside lay a small sled, pine slats polished smooth, the runners curved and sanded to a sheen. "I had some leftover boards from the wagon repairs," he said, brushing a hand over the grain. "Figured they'd get more use as this." Bethany gasped and ran to it. Bennett crouched beside her, fingers already testing the runner's edge. "It's beautiful," Brielle said, looking at Harlan. He didn't glance her way. "They'll outgrow it fast, but it'll last a few winters." Later that day, they hauled it to the slope behind the back field. The snow there was packed hard and glinted under the pale sun. Harlan led the children up the rise while Brielle stood at the bottom, watching. Bethany shrieked with laughter as they slid down, her arms wrapped tight around her brother. Harlan followed behind on foot, steadying them if the sled veered too far. His boots left clean tracks in the white crust, wide and certain. When they returned to the house, cheeks red and hair damp, Brielle helped them out of their coats and boots. Harlan hung his own by the stove, then poured water into the basin to wash the snow from his hands. "You carved that sled by hand," she said after the children had gone to rest. He nodded, drying his palms. "You didn't have to, I know." She stepped closer, voice quieter. "You made them feel like they belong here. That matters more than I can say." He looked at her then, eyes dark and clear. "They do belong." "So do you?" A few days later, Brielle found herself alone in the kitchen, sorting dried herbs from the bundles hanging near the stove. The air smelled of rosemary and smoke. She was humming without thinking, a tune from her childhood that surfaced now and again. It had no words, only the shape of comfort. Harlan stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders. "I saw a wagon stuck on the ridge," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Two men trying to get it over the ice. They'll need help, but I didn't recognize them." She poured him a cup of broth. "You going back?" He nodded. "They'll freeze if they stay the night up there." She reached for his scarf. "Take this. The wind's sharp today." He let her wrap it around his neck, her fingers brushing his collar. "I'll be back before dark," he said. She nodded, but her hand lingered on the wool. "Be careful." He left without another word, the door closing firm behind him. She stood still for a moment, holding the quiet. When he returned, the light had dimmed to blue dusk. A layer of ice clung to his coat, and his hands were red from cold. "They were heading west," he said, tugging off his boots. "Said they'd heard there was work at the mill near Ashland. I gave them a rope and helped ease the wagon down." She handed him a mug of tea. "That's a long road this time of year." He nodded, sipping slowly. "They looked younger than I expected," he added, settling into the chair near the fire. "Barely more than boys." She sat opposite him, her legs tucked beneath her skirt. "Some folks don't know how to wait. They think they have to run to find something better." He looked at her across the space. "You didn't run. You walked away from something that no longer held anything for you." She met his gaze. "I thought I had to keep moving. I didn't expect to find something worth stopping for." The fire crackled between them. Another week passed. The dress from town arrived wrapped in brown paper, the fabric folded with care. Brielle opened it alone in the bedroom, her hands unsteady on the string. The wool was deep red, lined with cream at the cuffs, the stitching neat and strong. She ran her fingers over the hem, then held it up to the window where the light caught the weight of it. She had not worn anything new since before Bennett was born. She put it away without trying it on. That night she stood beside Harlan outside the barn, watching the stars prick through the dark. "Have you ever thought about moving somewhere else?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Why?" "I wondered if you ever wanted more than this stretch of land, a bigger farm." "A town closer by." He leaned against the post, arms crossed. "I had those thoughts once, when I was younger, before I knew what it cost to chase new things. And now," he looked out over the snow-covered pasture, the moonlight catching the fence lines. "I've got what matters here," he said. "The rest I can live without." She didn't answer, not right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, letting their fingers tangle. Inside, the wind rattled the windows. Bethany and Bennett slept soundly, their breathing slow and even beneath their quilts. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Brielle lay awake, listening to the wind. Her thoughts were not restless the way they once had been. They moved slow, like the snow drifting off the eaves, steady and sure. She was not waiting anymore for someone to see her or to decide she was enough. She had been seen. The next morning, while the sky still held the pale color of dawn, Harlan came inside with a small box he'd carved from oak. He set it on the table and waited. She opened it with care. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, his handwriting neat and deliberate. It wasn't a letter. It was a list: spring seed, 2 more milk goats, a spare stovepipe, extra nails for the porch steps, cloth for Bethany's new dresses, a larger saddle for Bennett. And last, in smaller script, wedding clothes for Brielle. She looked up, throat tight. "I didn't know what you'd want," he said, "but I thought we ought to start planning." She rose from the chair, reaching across the table. He took her hands without question. "I wanted to be here," she said. "With the children, with you," his voice was low. "Then that's what we'll do." Outside, the snow had begun to melt along the edges of the yard, revealing patches of earth beneath. A new season waited just beyond the cold. And this time, she would step into it not alone, but with someone whose steady presence had turned a home into something more, a life. A family, a future. On a pale morning in late February, the wind shifted. It came down from the north, dry and sharp-edged, carrying with it the scent of thawing earth and distant smoke. It was the kind of wind that whispered of change, not the kind that startled or broke, but the kind that softened hard edges, as if the land itself were easing out of winter's long grip. Brielle stood behind the house with her sleeves rolled up, knees damp from kneeling in the patch of soil she'd cleared beside the porch. The ground was still tight with cold, but the top layer had loosened enough beneath the sun to let her fingers press through. She tested it, lifting a clump between her hands, breaking it gently apart. It would need time yet, but not much. A few more good days and the planting could begin. Inside the house, the children were bent close over the table, Bethany sketching onto scraps of paper with a charcoal stub, while Bennett traced something with his pocket knife into a thin slab of birch Harlan had given him from the woodshed. They worked in quiet concentration, and Brielle could hear the occasional rustle of paper when the wind slipped through the cracked window. Harlan was at the far field, repairing a gatepost that had snapped under the weight of ice. He'd left just after breakfast, coat unbuttoned, sleeves rolled. She'd caught a glimpse of his profile through the kitchen window as he walked across the yard, jaw set, strides sure, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. He hadn't seen her looking, and she hadn't called him back. There was something she liked about watching him move through the land like he was part of it. When he returned, the sun was high and his shirt clung to his back. He wiped his hands on a cloth as he stepped onto the porch. "You get it set?" she asked. He nodded. "Had to dig deeper than I expected. Root system was thicker under that fence line than I thought." "I found onion sets in the root cellar," she said. "They're soft but not spoiled. Might be ready to plant by next week." He leaned against the porch post, watching her brush dirt from her palms. "We'll put in potatoes, too. I've got seed eyes saved in the barn, enough for 2 full rows if we space them right." She stood, stretching the tightness from her back. "I'll need to mend the hem on Bethany's apron before she helps. It's dragging in the mud." "I'll build her a stool," he said without pause, "something she can sit on without falling into the row." Her smile was small, but it held. "You think of everything." He looked at her, long enough that the wind shifted again, catching her hair across one cheek. He reached out and tucked it behind her ear, his thumb grazing the skin just below her temple. "I think of what matters," he said. That evening, as the fire snapped low and dusk settled over the windows, Brielle stood at the table, folding the dressmaker's parcel that had arrived the week before. The red wool dress hung now from a peg near the hearth, its hem freshly sewn, cuffs reinforced. She hadn't worn it yet, but she had pressed it herself, smoothing each fold with care. Bethany came to her side, holding out a square of folded lace. "Can this be part of it?" Brielle took it gently. "Where did you find this?" "In the sewing basket. It looks like a collar." "It is," she said. "It belonged to my mother." "Can I sew it on?" Brielle hesitated. "You know how." Bethany nodded, serious. "You showed me last winter when the buttons were loose on my coat." "All right," Brielle said, "but we'll do it together." They sat side by side at the table, the firelight soft against their faces. Bethany held the lace steady while Brielle stitched. The thread moved smooth through the fabric, each loop strong and true. When it was done, Bethany leaned her head against her mother's arm. "You'll be beautiful." Brielle kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I already have everything I need." 2 days later, they were married beneath the cottonwoods that lined the creek, the ground still cool beneath their feet but the air touched with warmth. They stood with Bennett and Bethany beside them, Harlan's hand wrapped firm around hers. Silas spoke the vows in a low voice, clear and steady, his sister Kate standing off to the side with the children. Brielle wore her red dress with the lace collar stitched in place, her hair braided and pinned back with the single silver comb she'd kept since her youth. Harlan wore his best shirt, the sleeves freshly pressed, and his boots cleaned until the leather shone like riverstone. When it was done, they didn't kiss with show or ceremony. They leaned into each other like the wind did against the pines, quiet, natural, enduring. The children clapped, and Bennett grinned so wide his cheeks flushed. They walked back to the house together, arm in arm, the snow melting in patches along the ridge. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Brielle stepped out onto the porch. The stars were out, sharp and clear. She breathed in the cold, then let out a long, quiet breath. Harlan came to stand behind her, wrapping the wool blanket around them both. His arms settled around her waist, firm and sure. "I never thought it would be like this," she said. "Like what?" "Simple," she said. "True. Truth's not always loud," he said. "Sometimes it's just steady." She turned in the circle of his arms, her hands resting against his chest. "I want to plant carrots on the west side. The soil's softer there. And maybe hollyhocks along the fence. We will. And I thought we could build a bench under the cottonwoods. That way we can sit out there when the weather turns warm. We'll do that too." She tipped her head against him. "It's strange, isn't it? How a person can carry so much for so long, and then one day it sets down without you realizing." He rested his chin against her hair. "It set down the day you stepped through that door." They stood like that until the cold urged them back inside. The house was quiet, the only sound the slow crackle of the fire and the wind rising again outside, soft through the eaves. The weeks that followed passed in a rhythm that felt both new and long familiar. The ground thawed. The planting began. Bennett learned to harness the mule with Harlan, his hands steadying with each lesson. Bethany practiced letters at the table, her tongue caught between her teeth when she concentrated, a habit Brielle remembered from her own childhood. The house changed in small ways. A shelf added near the stove for drying herbs. A second hook by the door for her shawl. A quilt stitched slowly in the evenings, each square cut from pieces of their old lives. Brielle's apron, Harlan's worn shirt, Bethany's faded skirt. The past made useful again. One afternoon, as spring pressed fully into the valley, Silas rode up with news that the schoolhouse in Miles City was taking on new instructors. There were openings for women who could read and write and teach children of mixed ages. Brielle stood on the porch as he spoke, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. "I don't think I'll go," she said when Silas had ridden on. "Not now. You could," Harlan said, "if you wanted to. I think I want to stay here, teach my own children first. Then maybe others if they come," he nodded. "Then we'll make room for it." They did. A corner of the front room became a space for learning. Brielle fashioned a chalkboard from an old panel of wood Harlan sanded smooth. She taught Bethany to read by candlelight. Bennett to write his name in careful, deliberate strokes. The house filled not just with warmth, but with the kind of quiet purpose that held fast even when the wind rose outside. Months passed, and then a year. On a morning in early autumn, Brielle stood in the doorway, one hand resting lightly across the curve of her belly. She watched Harlan lift a bucket to the well, his movements slower than they'd once been, but just as certain. Bennett ran past with a length of rope, Bethany chasing him with a ribbon fluttering in her hand. Brielle stepped out into the sun and called to them, her voice strong. They turned toward her, and the sound of their laughter rose clear across the field. She smiled. It was not the kind of happiness that burned bright and fast. It was deeper, the kind that took root, the kind that stayed, and it was hers.